Welcome to Sideline Steve. I will be doing weekly videos on all things the NBA and NFL, so if that interests you, be sure to subscribe. And for this video, make sure you comment below what you think of my evaluation of the Bills, if I'm too high, too low, or just right. The Bills are one of the most interesting teams in the entire NFL because though they've been almost the consensus number one team, they are first and foremost dealing with a tremendous amount of injuries that forces a reevaluation of what the team is as opposed to what they ideally can be. And speaking of injuries, they've had an injury at the most important position, and Josh Allen's play has precipitously fallen off since getting injured, and it sort of makes logical sense. His throwing elbow has been hurt, and he's been struggling to throw the ball and read the field quite as well as he was beforehand. I don't think that's in small part due to the injury, but it's a tad bit worrisome because he's kind of regressed towards old habits of not reading the field very well and being quick to run, which is just less efficient than passing the ball in an ideal world, but also it leads to more contact on him, which is worrying because when he gets hit, he really gets hit, and he doesn't avoid the contact basically ever. So, despite all that negativity, though, he still ranks top 5 in both PFF grade and EPA, and I would say his ceiling is as good as maybe Mahomes is, if not even a little bit better, just because I think he's a little bit more physically gifted. But what ultimately weighs into his grade the most for me is his floor. And his floor, I would say, is an average quarterback, which is still really good. If your worst play is going to be average, that's incredible. But for Mahomes, I would say his floor is maybe a top 10 quarterback still. So there are some levels to it. And for that reason, I give Josh Allen an A for quarterback. But at his peak, he's almost unmatchable. Moving to their weapons, you have to start with Stephon Diggs, who is one of the absolute premier receivers in the NFL. And the only thing that is not perfect for him is I think he can struggle a bit with physical corners, such as what the Chiefs have traditionally had. And he's so pivotal to their total success as a team because I like Gabe Davis, but I ideally like him as a number 3. And he's forced into being their number 2. And after him, I like Dawson Knox as well. I think he's a solid tight end, but he's forced into being their number 3. So they are a little bit miscast with their weapons, but at the end of the day, wide receiver is a position that's considered strong link, which means you're as good as your best players are. And Stephon Diggs is really, really good. So I give them an A for weapons. As for their offensive line, as a bit of a spoiler, this is going to be their worst grade. And it's chiefly driven by the fact that Dion Dawkins is very good, and Mitch Morris is also really solid as a center. But beyond them, there's some kind of weak links to pick apart, specifically on the right side, where Ryan Bates is a low end starter, and Spencer Brown is, dare I say, a turnstile as a tackle, which is kind of confusing why he's starting still. In my opinion, I think they should go with David Quessenberry, who is a very good run blocker, which would help to open up the offense a bit more. Stat wise, PFF ranks them as 21st in pass blocking and 28th in run blocking, which kind of just shows they're not very good at either aspect of the game. And for that reason, I give them a D as an offensive line. Fortunately enough, the sour taste of their offensive line gets washed out immediately when you look at their defense. Starting with their defensive line, which I consider edge rushers and the interior as one collective defensive line, It's just really good. And it's driven by both star power and depth, which you just love to see, especially for a defensive line where it's nice to be able to rotate in a bunch of guys so as to keep everybody at 100% for the entire game. They have, when healthy, Von Miller, who is still one of the absolute best edge rushers in the entire game. Greg Russo, who is also getting into that territory. And then Boogie Basham, who's a really solid pass rusher. Interior wise, they're also now a strength at that position as Ed Oliver has really grown into a great player. Daquan Jones is also really good on the interior. And then rotationally, Jordan Phillips is still a nice piece, as is Tim Settle. You don't really settle when you have him in. So it's nice all around. And I give them an A. The only reason it's not an A plus is because I'm a little bit worried about Von Miller's injury because it was said to be an injury that could possibly be year long. And just in general, he's an older player with an injury. So that holds them back slightly, but they are still just really, really good. Staying in the front seven, but moving back a little bit, their linebacker core is, surprisingly enough, another strength of theirs, as both Matt Milano and Tremaine Edmonds rank in PFF's top 15 linebackers. So, with that said, I'm going to give them an A plus, and that's especially the case because they just don't have any deficiencies in their game. Both are super athletic, can cover, can blitz, can defend the run. There's basically nothing I don't trust either of them to do. So we reached our final positional group, and that being defensive back, which is, I would say, a solid group. It's not perfect, though. And a lot of it is, again, injury related. I think the loss of Micah Hyde has been underrated because the replacements have been very solid for him. But anytime you lose a top 5 safety in my eyes, you're going to be a bit worse for it. And that's particularly the case because Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer just played off of each other so nicely. They were sort of like the linebacker core where they just don't have deficiencies in any aspect of the game. And when you have players like that, you can just do so much chess playing where, one of them can blitz, one of them can cover. You could have both of them manned up. You can do so many different things. And they've sort of lost that a bit, but luckily enough, they still have Jordan Poyer, obviously. For their corners, I like them, but I don't love them. Trey White is, I think, their best, and he has dealt with injuries this year. And even at his absolute best, I think he's a really solid but not elite corner because he's very nice as a zone guy, but I don't trust him much for shutting down a receiver, and I think their scheme helps to mitigate that issue. But at the end of the day, there are times where it's really nice to have a guy that can shut down an elite receiver, and they just don't have that. But what they do have is a defensive back core that doesn't have any weaknesses, which is exactly how you like it, because defensive backs are a weak link position, which means you're only as good as your weakest link. And they don't really have anybody to target. So, for that reason, mixed with not having an eraser truly, I give them a B for defensive backs. And lastly, their coaching is fantastic. I love the duo of Sean McDermott and Leslie Frazier, as I feel like both just totally understand what they're trying to do, and they blend their scheme mixed with their talent so nicely, where they do play a lot of off coverage and a lot of conservative zone stuff that allows for great success even if you don't have the most capable man corners. And I think that's why they've been able to cycle in so many different defensive backs when they've had injuries, is because they do know how to assist them. And on the offensive side of things, I think Ken Dorsey is a really underrated offensive coordinator. I think he's filled in for Brian Dable in a fantastic way, where he still runs a lot of the similar concepts that Dable did, but at the end of the day, that's kind of a good thing. Dable was a great offensive coordinator. That's why he's a head coach now. And what he was doing just plays to the strength of the team, where they can pass basically every play, but still be a pretty aggressive team where they're not just doing short passes that act as runs. They're still going deep with Gabe Davis and Stephon Diggs. So I think coaching wise, they're very good. I give them an A, and it would be an A plus if they were just a little bit more aggressive on fourth down decisions, because I think at the end of the day, Josh Allen gives you such a great chance on nearly any fourth down, because at a minimum, he's going to be able to run for it and hopefully fight for the needed yards. But they're not bad with fourth down decisions either, so they're a great bunch. So if you would like a lengthier version of this, be sure to check out the description, as it'll list my positional rankings as well as how I arrived to them. But in total, I give the Bills a B plus, which is a fantastic grade. It means, roughly speaking, they are top 10 at every positional group. So I think, if anything, we've become a little bit numb to just how good the Bills are. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, please like it, comment if you have anything to say, and subscribe if you'd like to see more analytical content on the NFL and NBA.